Welcome to the Transportation Sales Tax Program, also known as RoadWise. I have a very interesting program for you today. We're going to be talking about the environment. A lot of folks believe that we simply go about building roads and bridges and all of those things, and that we're not paying attention to the environment. Well, that's not true. As a matter of fact, there is a long, very much involved process as it has to do with the environment. And I want you to meet a gentleman that I work with, and he is with that part of our work. He is an environmentalist, and his name is Ed Schmale, and he is an environmental specialist, which also makes you an engineer of sorts.
Working with the engineers.
You're working, but you're a specialist in environmental kinds of issues.
That's right.
What kind of training have you had?
Well, I have a degree in biology and I also have a degree in chemistry.
Yeah.
But this field kind of attracts people from all different kinds of backgrounds. Majority of people probably have some sort of natural science background, such as biology, just from speaking with other professionals. That kind of seems to be the majority of the education.
Now, you're a part of the RoadWise or Transportation Sales Tax Program team. And are there others like you who are responsible for looking into environmental issues as well?
Yes, we have, certain people have different focuses. My focus is more on the wetlands end of our projects. We have people that are noise specialists and public involvement specialists and NEPA specialists, and we also sometimes have to hire cultural resource specialists for historical resources, things of that nature.
What made you interested in this area of road building? It sort of seems like it fits in, but then on the other side, you wonder, why is there an environmental specialist involved?
Well, when I originally got into this field, I didn't even know this specific field existed when I was in college. But I mostly wanted to work in the outdoors, so that's why I, chose something that had environmental in the title. But when a road is built or a bridge, there's a long list of government regulation to comply with, and a lot of that is related to environmental protections. And a project can't get a permit from whatever agency would have jurisdiction over a resource that's impacted.
And there are a whole list of organizations that have to oversee a project even before it gets started. And that makes me think of NEPA you mentioned, and I think we ought to spell that out to everybody. It's the National Environmental Policy Act, and that's a federal law.
NEPA is basically the general intent of NEPA. Just a broad, easy description is that it was created to make sure federal money was being spent on anything that there was an opportunity to review what the impact of that money was going to be.
It must be especially important and maybe critical to have an act like this and to have people like you working in this area, especially in Charleston and the Charleston community, the surrounding communities, because it's such a historical place. It's filled with wetlands of every kind. It has all sorts of various little animals and what have you. So this is really a challenge for an environmentalist, is it not?
Yeah, Charleston definitely has a denser concentration of protected resources, versus, some other parts of the state and even, the country, where, if you build something, depending on the complexity of the project, at the very least, you're probably going to have to deal with some wetland issues. And, if it's a big project, you're probably going to encompass all the environmental issues that you need to deal with.
Ed, what are wetlands?
Well, everyone I think knows what you go out and you see the marsh. That's a pretty obvious wetland. Now, believe it or not, that anywhere that meets the Army Corps of Engineers has a definition of what a wetland is, and they have jurisdiction over that wetland. So even if it's on your property, it's a federally protected resource.
Does somebody literally go into the marsh if that's the wetland that you're concerned about, looking for what?
Well, the Corps has 3 parameters that define a wetland. It's the plants, hydrology, which would just be water, and the soil. The water affects soil chemistry certain ways that changes color. So, you know, you could tell from looking at the soil, the plant communities, and then certain identifiers of water. It doesn't have to be that there's water there at that moment, but if has been water there for a period of time, it will leave evidence, and those are the 3 things that you would look at to determine.
There are various little creatures that, and I live on the water, and there are various little creatures that live in the marsh, and seashells, those shelled animals live there. And are you looking for those kinds of things, or what is it that you're looking for that says, I've got to tell somebody, whoever's going to be doing this project, that they need to watch out for this or the other thing, they need to divert it, go around it, or what's there that makes you, as an environmentalist specialist, decide that that's not going to be a good idea because the federal government is not going to let us get away with that?
Well, once you have your wetland identified, we'll go out, like you said, and try to identify where the boundary of that is, because it can be fairly simple to say, look at something and say that it's wetland, but it's a whole nother issue to determine where does it stop and where does the upland or high ground begin. So we'll go out and do that, and then that will be surveyed, and then we'll coordinate with the Army Corps of Engineers, and perhaps, depending on the resource, OCRM, they have jurisdiction over saltwater resources, and then we'll get them to agree to the boundary that's set, and then from there you can determine what your impacts might be on the project, or if the project can avoid the resource completely.
How many years have you been doing this work?
Almost 10 years now.
Have you, in those 10 years, had to divert or recommend that a project be diverted from a particular area because of the wetlands involving whatever that's important to the area?
I mean, yeah, it's usually, you go out there and you try to gather as much data as you can, and put it all overlay it on the project and try to determine what's the best option to avoid and minimize, because that's kind of the key word in both the permitting, in wetland permitting and NEPA, is that you need to show that the project avoids and minimizes impacts as much as feasible.
And so some changes may be made in the design of the project, or I don't know what else comes into play, but certainly there could be some changes.
Yeah, there could be, depending on the complexity of the project, they can sometimes steepen, fill slopes, so that will pull the limits of the project in. It usually would just be certain things in the design to minimize the footprint of the project as much as possible, or it could be a longer bridge, or a total shift, depending on, you may find something that was unknown until you went out there in the field, and you come back, and then maybe you do have to shift the alignment.
And you say this kind of thing has happened in your career?
I mean, yeah, it's a day to day.
Periodically?
That's kind of how, that's what we do on a day to day, is, try to integrate, what our findings are with the project designs, and try to get them to mesh in a manner that's going to be able to get the project approved.
Now, who would you answer to? Is it the Army Corps of Engineers? Who is the group or the national organization or the local organization that says, I want your report, they accept your report, and whatever recommendations you make? Who do you report to?
Well, it's, if it's a simple, like, locally funded project that, say, had wetlands, then, the Army Corps would be the federal agency with jurisdiction. Now, if it's a bigger project with federal funds, that we would have to go through NEPA process. Since it's transportation, that's the Federal Highways Administration has to determine that, that the project meets NEPA, and they can allocate the funds for construction.
I'm thinking right now about the fact that before the project takes place, you're looking for environmental issues, concerns that one should look at when building a project. My question now is, If the project is built, I'm talking about a road, whatever it might be, an intersection improvement, what have you, a bridge. Once the project is built, if there is some environmental issue afterwards, and I'm not assuming that you're overlooking it, I'm thinking about maybe a new family of something or another has moved in, or there was something overlooked in the beginning. What happens then? It's done. The project is done. There's no looking back, is there?
I mean, usually, once the project is, once that footprint is set, you would hope that there wouldn't be any other, impacts. The impacts would have already occurred. That there could be some maybe issues with, if soil washes off from the project, then those issues can be sort of, because someone is ultimately maintaining that facility, so there would be some upkeep if there would be soil that would wash off the project or something of that nature.
But as an environmentalist, you literally go into these areas, boots and all, and you're looking for yourself, and you've been trained to determine what it is you're seeing and whether or not the project could be a threat.
Yeah, we get out in the swamps and in the marsh and try to get eyes on the ground as best as possible to see what's actually out there. Because in the beginning you usually there's tons of information available now online and through geographic information systems, which is GIS. So you can bring all that in before you even set foot out of the office and get a good idea of what's out there. But you always need to get out and ground truth what's actually in the field.
There are environmentalist groups and conservational groups that are looking over your shoulder. These are people who all of their lives have had some sentiment for the environment. They really care. How do you deal with that? Because you might not be on the same accord.
Well, we're dealing usually in the public realm of construction, so we're trying to balance a public need for a project versus environment, and there definitely has to be a need shown for a project, if it would be able to get through the NEPA process and or get a permit. There has to be a need for a project, and people certainly can disagree on need, but that's definitely a factor that has to be met, at least through the federal government's eyes, if the project would ever get built.
So you make your recommendations and then you're out of it. The owner has to then decide what's going to happen from there.
Well, they make the ultimate decision. We're in a sense working for them to provide them all the information they need to make a defensible decision on a project.
So you give them what they need and then they have to go from there because the specialists have spoken.
Well, yeah, the federal government, depending on what's involved, if it's wetlands, then the Corps is going to be the one signing the permit. And there's other things that go on outside of my workings on how a project gets built. On it from the design standpoint with approvals from the DOT, but that's not necessarily the circles that I'm working in.
I think this might be in your area, it may not, and if it's a question that doesn't make sense for your area, just let me know. But I'm thinking about after the fact, pollution, noise, smoke from automobiles and buses and trucks and all of those things. Do they become an issue? And is that in your ballpark or is it somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean those are issues that you would, depending on the complexity of the project, if it was a simple repaving project out in the country, that's probably not going to be issues. But a complex project like Mark Clark or a big project, you're going to have to look at noise. You're going to have to look at air pollution. You're going to have to look at those things, in the process and determine what the potential impact would be. And a lot of times you're looking in the future. You're trying to look into the future, but those are definitely categories that you need to look at for a large road project.
Who do you deal with on a regular basis in terms of federal, state, or local agencies? Who are the people that you come into contact with as you're studying these various environmental issues?
Depending on the project, if it's under through RoadWise, we'll work with county staff on projects, or also the DOT, the SCDOT has an environmental unit that we work with them to make sure that everything is within federal or state environmental standards, and then also working with on the agency side, the Corps and DHEC.
When we come back from the break, I'm really curious about another area, and that has to do with mitigation and minimizing. And I'm just wondering, when do those two things, if ever, come into play? And we'll talk with that and a little bit more about the work that Ed is doing as an environmentalist. This is a very big part of road building and your transportation sales tax dollar. We'll be right back.
Hey, Charleston County, let's recycle. Charleston County makes it easy. Recycling glass, aluminum cans, steel and aerosol cans, plastics 1 to 7. We recycle them all. And don't forget paper. If it tears, recycle it. Even cardboard. Recycle at work, at home, and at play. So whether you're using the 2 curbside bin system and separating, or the all-in-one roll cart system, keep recycling. Brought to you by Charleston County Environmental Management.
Ed Schmale is my guest today, and we're talking about environmental specialists, folks like him who are responsible for seeing to it that we don't disrupt the environment or disrupt it as little as possible in the road building work that we do here with the transportation sales tax. And not only us here in Charleston County, but all over the country, because there's a federal agency called NEPA that's very much concerned about the environment and other issues as it has to do with the world around us as we put together these roads and bridges, intersections, and all the other things that are important to our ability to travel, the infrastructure that is. And Ed was telling us that in times he must, or those in his area, must make a decision to minimize or to mitigate, or at least that would be their recommendation as they work with the various agencies, federal agencies. And this is where federal dollars are concerned. That's where NEPA is involved. And I would think that NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, would be involved in most projects, aren't we? I mean, there's some federal dollars coming from everywhere. So do we find them in all projects?
Not all of the county projects involve federal dollars if they're just the sales tax projects, but NEPA still, if there's wetlands involved, then the Corps actually has to follow NEPA to issue the permit.
Okay.
So it's not directly involved, but it is involved through the permitting process.
So it doesn't have to necessarily be federally funded, but and so therefore that agency, that federal agency, wouldn't necessarily be involved. But we got the Army Corps of Engineers to deal with, whether it's federal or not. And so there's always somebody that's looking over the shoulder of you and all the rest of us as we go about building projects in our community.
If there's an impact, you could have a resurfacing project or a simple sidewalk project where there really was no impact. In those instances, the review is fairly simple, and if you don't need a permit so those projects can be done fairly quickly.
Give us an example of when you recommend or the idea of minimizing a project is recommended. Maybe not necessarily a federal program or a federal project, maybe just a local project, or either one, whichever one you want to speak to. But I'm wondering, when does that happen? And then when does mitigation occur? But let's start with the first
The hierarchy is supposed to be, and this is federal guidelines, is to first avoid, and then if you can't avoid, to minimize. And if once you've minimized as much as you can, then if you need to, you would mitigate.
Right. Okay. And we have a good example of mitigation. The Palmetto Commerce Parkway was one of those projects, and we ended up on a portion of a plantation. And from that came all sorts of wonderful things. We were able to develop a rice program because it was an area on the Palmetto Commerce Parkway project, or within that project, where we found that enslaved people had come over from Africa and had been settled in that area and had brought their rice. And that rice is a staple of this country. And now there's a program in the schools, teaching young people about rice and how it got here. That to me is it's a charming thing to consider. And it's one of those opportunities to mitigate. And not only that, the geologists who looked into the area said, yeah, we've got some history here. And so that came out well, and it still goes on. And the idea of mitigating here continues to build and to educate young people. I won't go into that too much more because there were several of us on staff that were responsible, and I guess I'm showing how proud we are.
Yeah, that definitely was a unique.
Is my chest sticking out
a
here?
unique opportunity.
It
there.
certainly was. When are you through with your work as it regards a given project? You must go to what point, and then you turn over whatever your findings, and then you head for the next project.
You know, we sort of these days, the more of the movement is to try to follow the project all the way, you know, through the end of construction and close out. So, you know, we're going out on projects now and making sure that, you know, it complies with everything that was agreed with, you know, in the planning stages. And, you know, we try to follow projects until they're, you know, officially closed out.
What's the most difficult issue that you run into as an environmentalist? I don't know if it's an area like this, because you work in other areas as well, not only Charleston County, but you work with other projects.
Yes.
And I don't know if we're the toughest one or if there are others, but I'm just curious about the kinds of things that you've run into that were stumpers. What do we do about this?
We've definitely run in, you know, over the years, you know, we've run into some unique issues here and there. It seems like almost every project has something, you know, that comes up, and it's kind of the issue on that project. You know, for Palmetto Commerce Parkway, for example, when we found all those, you know, rice fields out there, I mean, no one really knew about that, and we only found it because, you know, it was the density of it was found because of the project. And,
Right.
You know.
So those are the things that what sort of catch you, and you go, oh, what are we going to do here?
Yeah, and you know, have to come up with sometimes you have to come up with unique solutions to try to, you know, get the project complete. When, you know, in that instance, we had to provide the State Historic Preservation Office with a plan that balanced the impacts to that resource in a way that they said, you know, okay, now, you know, the project has our approval because you're going to come back later and, you know, educate the public, and, you know, that will sort of offset the physical impact of the project.
Has that been one of the most difficult, or are there others, and how were they eventually mitigated?
It's hard to say what the most difficult issue has been in my career. You definitely have dealt with some pretty, you know, complex projects which have, you know, a litany of issues. But I'd say that just overall, just the joke is, you know, that we kind of are between the pave it all and the save it all people. So we're kind of in the middle, trying to balance a project, you know, against environmental impact.
Well, now, you know, I was going to jump on that. Leave it all or save it all. Do you walk away sometimes? Is that really, I mean, does that really happen? Do you just say, oh no, we're not touching this?
Well, I mean, it's usually not a decision that I would make, but
Right.
I mean, it does happen where projects just don't turn out to be viable, you know, use of funds, and, you know, just to move on.
Is
to
it because
something.
it's hard to access the property or the issue that's concerned here? Or is it because it's too costly? Or is it because it's just the right thing to do? Because we would be disturbing a part of the environment that does not need disturbing?
Usually, if there is going to be an environmental impact, it's going to come with a cost. So that definitely can play into the viability of a project. You know, impacts may be such that mitigation might be a deciding factor on if a project is viable.
For everything that you deal with in the environment, there are all sorts of things that make up the environment. But is there an agency that covers that, like SHPO, or is it just that the Army Corps of Engineers would make a decision or be responsible because there's no agency or there's no citizens group that's concerned? Because there's not a citizens group for everything in the environment.
No, there is sort of an agency involved with most types of resources, and when there's a decision made, their coordination does have to occur between all of them to get their buy-off. The Historic Preservation Office would be over historic resources. Corps would be over wetlands. You have Fish and Wildlife Service, who would be over threatened and endangered species. You have National Marine Fisheries Service, who would be over the fisheries, waters. DHEC is over. They have a bunch of different arms resources that they protect.
There are some who say it takes a project forever to get started, and I don't know who is involved in what part of the process takes the longest. I'm not going to suggest that it's the environmental impact people, but it takes a while, and I don't think the public always understands that once we identify the need for a project, there are a whole bunch of things that it's got to go through, including what you do, the environment. That project could be announced on a given year or during a given year, and it doesn't start happening for maybe 2 or 3 years. There's some time that's involved to get all these things done.
Yeah, and it's not, it's the environmental process, and then actual designing the project and the engineering level. There's a lot of approvals on that end. There's approvals on the environmental end. So it definitely can be a time-consuming process for a complex project.
Do you enjoy your work?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely an interesting field. Regulations are ever changing, so it's definitely interesting. I like to get out in the field and work.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in August, but.
But you'll work. You
Yeah.
still enjoy it. Enjoyed talking with you, Ed Smale. This has been a very interesting program. I hope you found it that way. We have, certainly. So there you have it, the Transportation Sales Tax Program, sometimes called RoadWise. And we've been talking about the environment, our precious environment, and how this program, just as many programs across the country, look out for and take care of the environment. Until next time, we'll see you. I'm Cheryl Hurlston. For more information about the Charleston County Transportation Sales Tax Program and specific information on the road construction improvement projects, visit us on our web at roads.charlestoncounty.org. Also, connect with us on Facebook and Twitter at CC Roadwise.